Hello, I am so glad that you're joining us for this podcast. I have been dying to interview my friend Eric Scherrer for a long time about leadership. And the reason that this is going to be such a great podcast is because I know him from a business coaching standpoint. We actually work for the same company together and follow some of the same principles there. But Eric is a squadron commander of a Marine fighter squadron in Yuma, Arizona. And his position there and in what he does is so critical to our safety here in the United States. Eric, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today. Will you tell our audience what you do in this role?
You bet, Renee. Hey, and thanks for having me. This is so cool. I'm so thrilled to get to spend this time with you. And I really hope that I know we're going to cover great things today, but I really hope that the audience is able to take away some gems from this. And what my job particularly is I'm the commanding officer of an aggressor squadron. And the Marine Corps has one aggressor squadron. The Navy has two. They're about to have three. And then the Air Force has a very large aggressor squadron. Our job, and we all work together. And so the pilots that come into my squadron are hand selected. They're typically weapons school graduates, very experienced flight leads across the Marine Corps. And they come in and we go through a very regimented syllabus that takes over a year where we study, we learn the other nations that are out there. We would call them our peer adversaries. We study them. We learn their aircraft. We learn their missile systems to the best of our ability, and we learn about their tactics. And then what we do is we turn around and then we train all of the fleet squadrons. And the fleet squadrons would be you're deploying squadrons that are going out, whether deploying on an aircraft carrier or just simply deploying overseas to Europe or to different parts of Asia. And we train with them. We are the Red Force. And so we will train with them and help them learn how to work against the tactics they may see on their deployment.
Eric, thank you for explaining what you do. And oh my goodness, what a level of battle readiness you must have to have all of the time. Can you talk a little bit about how you discipline yourself or manage your day or your thinking to really be ready to protect our nation at such a high level?
Well, Renee, I really think that it really doesn't matter whether you're operating in the fighter community, in the military, whether you're operating a flight department for a corporation, whether you're working in an ER, or you're just running a business. There's a level of preparedness that we always have to have. And the end state that we have to have in mind is just recognizing that we need to know our craft. And then to know your craft is understanding, why do I need to know my craft? In my case, understanding my craft, understanding what I am by law, what I am directed to do, the mission of my organization. The why is, I want the pilots that train with us, that fly against us, I want them to be so prepared so that when they deploy, they're not going to see anything that they haven't already seen. And so that the training with them is paramount. And the same thing happens in a flight department for a company or an organization. The end state is getting folks safely to where they need to be. And so that is the why. And so everything that we do is moving towards that end state.
That's amazing. Well, speaking about that, you've had to lead a number of times during your military career during times of undue stress. And you and I have talked about this a little bit before, some action that you've seen in the military, some things that you weren't expecting that came up that you suddenly had to train for. And then, of course, maintaining battle readiness during the pandemic added complexities that no one could have imagined. Can you talk a little bit about what your protocol is for managing or leading in stress, and how, as lay people, we could actually put that into practice in our lives?
Absolutely. Renee, I as far as the COVID thing, COVID was easy for us. Because with COVID, all you do is you just maintain your rhythm. Sometimes you have to change, you have to adapt your rhythm. And we all did that. All successful organizations during the pandemic adapted, but that was stress. So let me tell you, there was actually one of the most stressful periods in my life that I worked through. It was a deployment that we were preparing for. I had come back with my squadron for a deployment. We had come back in the summer, the year prior, and we're working up for another deployment in which we were going to deploy a year later. Well, global events unfolded and we had to deploy immediately. Now, the workup process, the difference here, the deployment that I had been on was a land-based deployment. This deployment, the new one that we were going on as a squadron, was a carrier-based deployment. The workup cycle, the lead-up cycle to a carrier deployment is extremely long, up to a year, to where you're integrating the entire carrier air wing, all the logistics, getting all the aircraft ready. It's a long process because you're having to qualify the pilots to land day and night on the carrier. Well, we had gotten to that point. We had gotten to the point where all of the pilots were qualified to land both day and night on the carrier. And then the flag went up and we had to leave. And it wasn't leaving in a matter of months. It was, we had 2 weeks. So there is a tremendous amount of stress at this point because from a maintenance perspective, we have to get the aircraft ready. From a logistics perspective, we have to make sure that everything is ready to go and ready to get moved on to the ship and then pre-positioned where it needs to be overseas. So logistics was very important. And then there's just the people aspect of it, making sure the families are ready. And this was a huge stressor for me because I had a son who was born while I was on the deployment the year prior. I didn't meet him until he was 6 months old. And then I'm leaving now less than a year later. And so from just a human factors perspective, there's a lot of stress. And I would say that some of those things I handled well, some I didn't. But I learned 4 things. And I really believe that leaders, regardless of what we are, what organization we're leading, if we apply these 4 things, we can be successful. The first one is just simply acknowledge the stress. It's easy for some of us that are very type A, very driven to say, I got this. This isn't a big deal. We push it to the background, but we have to acknowledge that it's there. Just simply acknowledge that it's a reality. You have to name it.
So for people who have trouble with that, how do you do that? Like if I say, I don't know if it's stress or not, what would you say to me?
I would say, Renee, what is your husband saying to you? What are your friends saying to you? Are they saying, you look stressed? Are you okay? You got to listen to them. And you got to say, yeah, maybe I am.
And then what do you do about it?
And then at that point, I think just acknowledging the stress, that's opening the door. Acknowledging the stress is the first step. Because if you don't acknowledge the stress, you're not going to do what is required to actually be successful, not only for yourself, but for the organization. And if a leader is not managing his or her stress well, the organization is not going to manage their stress well. So it opens the door. It opens the door to success.
That's great. Okay. Step 1, acknowledge I'm stressed. What's step 2?
All right. Step 2 is be at the point of friction. Now, there's a unique balance here, Renee. You don't want to be a micromanager. You can't be there just driving the ship, doing everything yourself, but it's a matter of just be there, be available. So in my case, I was the operations officer. I wasn't the squadron commanding officer for this deployment. I was the operations officer. And in a business aviation world, I would be probably a mix between the chief pilot and then running the flight department, the operations department. And so I was responsible for everything operations. I had a small staff that was working for me at the time. We had about 6 people that were working for me. And our job was to ensure that we had everything ready to go. So operations really encompasses everything. And so I simply remained present. I had to say, okay, folks, this is what we need to get done. I delegated, and then I followed up. And then I was present for questions. And I was the conduit between my staff, the team that was working for me, and then my commanding officer, the CO. And so I would go back and forth. I would screen things that were coming from above, and then I would provide input from my team up and just be able to answer questions on both sides. The tendency sometimes is to take all of that on ourselves. And I would say really we can do one of two things. We can either one, take all of that on ourselves and we stop delegating. We start frantically thinking about how can I answer the questions from above and how do I do all of this at this level? Or we can disengage and we can say, I just can't handle this, and we disengage. The key to balance those two things is just to be present, be available, be there. It doesn't mean you're in the office the entire time. Maybe you step out and then you come back in, but it's maintaining that very healthy balance.
I love that. And one of the things that I heard you say that you do in that friction is that you serve as a filter, and then probably going both directions. You're filtering some from the CO down to your staff, and then you're probably taking the most important things from your staff and summarizing those for the CO.
That's right.
What is kind of your rule of thumb for managing that?
Well, again, I want to be present for my CO. So he or she has to have the information, because the way that I think about it, really my rule of thumb is that I'm not just serving my boss, but I'm serving my boss's boss. In a civilian organization, that could be the shareholders. That could be the board of directors. So you have to think one step ahead of, what does my boss's boss need to know? And then I'm providing him or her that information. If I can do that, and I don't always do it well, none of us always do it well, but if that is our end state, if we can feed that information, ultimately, not only will your boss be taken care of, but your boss's boss will have the information they need to make sound decisions that will also enhance the readiness of your organization.
All right. Can you give me an example that's not top secret? Like, what does that look like as you're filtering, as you're thinking about, okay, what's the one thing that's really going to make this mission successful? What's the key that has to get up to the commander in chief,
You got
if
it.
you will, in this?
All right. Absolutely. So let me give you a great example. And I think some of your audience can really identify with this. It's going on in my life right now. So with our aircraft, we have a planned maintenance schedule for all of our jets. Every aviation department has the same thing. It doesn't matter the aircraft you fly, there's a planned maintenance schedule for that aircraft. At the highest level, we call it our depot level maintenance. They started a new contract, and the supply line process for that contract is just, there's a learning curve. And so the length of time it takes an aircraft to go through the depot level maintenance, the highest level of scheduled maintenance, is taking a long time. And that is directly influencing my readiness and my ability to perform my mission. And so what I do is I inform my boss not only what the degradation is, but I also inform my boss, here are solutions that I am proposing to fix the problem. He then takes those solutions, those proposed solutions, and he can then brief his boss. And he can show his boss, he can say, here's the issue. If we don't have this fixed, this is the degradation and readiness that we're going to accept, but here's how we fix it. So you're providing a solution. So that's actually one thing that I'm working through right now.
What a great example. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, you could tell us and you didn't even have to kill us after you told us. So I appreciate that thoughtfulness on your behalf for our audience today. Okay, so step one is to acknowledge the stress. Step two is to remain at the point of friction. What's step three?
The third step is, don't make decisions alone.
Ooh.
Don't make decisions in a vacuum. It's very easy for us, particularly as just driven leaders, to say, I've got to make a decision on this. I own it. I got to make a call. That's a good thing to an extent. In a time compressed scenario, when you're operating under stress, your emotions are going to be high. They just are. And so in order to make sound decisions, you've got to have a good sounding board. And that's where your team comes in. There are times where you just have to pause and just say, hear me out on this. What are your thoughts on this? What would you do in this situation? And Renee, it kind of comes back to being somewhat of a coaching leader, right? You're coaching your staff and you're asking them for their input so that you're giving them, I think there's a couple things that come from that. One, you're giving them ownership in the decisions that are being made. So they're going to critically think about it. Two, it really enforces the concept of we are a team. It's not just boss and teammate or boss and employee, it is a team. And then finally, it keeps you from operating in a vacuum and making poor decisions because you're just emotionally overcome by events.
Yeah, or especially in these times of prolonged stress, we get tired or we get depleted, and it really affects our judgment.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's okay for us to make decisions and judgment to be affected, but the long-reaching impact of that can be astronomical. It can be life or death of a person, of a squadron, of a company. It can be critical.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect lead in to the fourth thing that I learned, Renee, and that was just simply maintaining your rituals. And so if you're a person that loves to get up in the morning and you have, whether you're meditating or you're praying or you're reading or whatever it happens to be, you need to keep your rituals alive. Now that's going to change. It doesn't mean that you can't spend an hour meditating or an hour reading, but you could probably spend 5 minutes just sitting in a chair, acknowledging gratitude, breathing, and then get up and go. Likewise, like if you enjoy physical training, you're probably not going to have time to go out on a 5-mile run or do a full functional 45-minute workout, but you can probably, at the end of the day, take a walk around the block and then maybe do some deep stretches before you go to bed. So it's maintaining, to the best of your ability, your rituals and your habits. It just helps cage your brain. It keeps your heart and your mind sound and just provides the framework for sanity. If you lose that in the long run, you're going to be depleted.
Oh, so good. Okay, so I want to ask you this. I first started looking at how leaders in the military lead when I read this book by Richard Brookhiser. I don't know if you've read it. It's called George Washington on Leadership. And one of my favorite stories in here is about him delegating to solve a problem that they had not anticipated, which is the need for latrines when they had all of these volunteer soldiers gathered to fight the redcoats, because they had never realized before that how much poop piles up. And so it's just really interesting to see some of the unexpected lessons that you can learn, life lessons even, that you can learn from military leadership. Do you have any examples like that you can talk to us about? Or what are your biggest takeaways from military leadership that you apply to your life?
It's the military is so interesting because unlike business, and maybe it's not unlike business, but you can't always choose your team. So when people check into my squadron, men and women check in, I haven't had the opportunity to vet them. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know what their strengths are. I don't know where they fall out in the Strengths Finder or Colby. I don't know any of those things, and I haven't had the option to filter that. So I don't know what their strengths and weaknesses are. However, over time, you get to know your team and you recognize, hey, this lady over here, she is really, really good at this particular thing. Let's move them into this position and then let them run. And so it's just a matter of, regardless of the organization, it's recognizing the strengths of the folks that are on your team, and then sitting down with them as you walk around. You as a leader you're always curious, and you're always asking questions, and you're always wanting to know, how can we as an organization do something better? It's amazing, from your newest team member to somebody who's been there for a long time. It's amazing what you will learn from them and then be able to implement. It's fantastic. Let me give you an example, actually. So with our aircraft, this is really simple and maybe a little bit funny, but I'm walking around the hangar and one of my quality assurance guys comes up and says, hey, Skipper, One of the things that we used to have on the jets, and we haven't had it in probably 5 years, is we used to have the plane captain's names. And the plane captain is the Marine who's responsible for the upkeep, the care, how the aircraft looks, and that sort of thing. And he said, Skipper, we haven't had the plane captain's names on the jets for over 5 years. And that was a big point of pride for everybody. And we just haven't had it. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. So I go to my maintenance officer and I said, hey, Manny, let's put the plane captain's names on the jets so that as they come in and out, we can just paint their names on the sides. And we've done that. And it's just great. Now the guys and gals look at us, that is my jet. And the pride has really gone up measurably just in their faces as you walk out to the airplane. So that's a recent example for me.
I love that. So what I'm hearing you say is that you have to take what you're given and turn it into something that is working very efficiently and very effectively, and achieving your mission. And that means that you as a leader have to adapt in some ways to other people's personalities and be able to reshuffle or rearrange responsibilities. So even within the constraints of military ranks and assignments, you do have the leeway to be a great leader despite not being able to choose who your team is. And I think that's a really great lesson for people who are feeling stuck, is looking at what they could do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's just seeing who do you have. It's taking time. It's taking time to not only get to know your organization and get to know your team, but recognizing what are their strengths and then where can they best be plugged in to not only keep them happy, but to keep them productive. Because if they're not happy and they're not operating in their strengths, they're not going to be productive. And eventually you're going to lose them. And we'll lose folks in the military just like you lose them in business, because the grass is always greener.
It is. One of the things that you and I coach about, and I know this is incredibly important to the Marines. I watched the rerun of A Few Good Men the other day, and they were talking about values. Mm-hmm. And the values of the Marine Corps. Values are critical in business. Mm-hmm. Values-based hiring and recruiting is important. And then holding people accountable to their values can be really important. Can you talk a little bit about how that's the same in the Marines and in business?
It really is. So in any organization, understanding what you value is tantamount to your success. And I would say that what your values do, sometimes they either inform your mission or they come from your mission. And then you have priorities that are based off of that. So in the military, I don't necessarily get to choose my mission. My mission is given to me. And so as I get the mission, I then prioritize what are my priorities? What are our priorities as an organization to accomplish the mission? And I'm a firm believer in really only having one priority. That is my personal belief, because if you have more than one priority, everything else is not really a priority, and they begin to compete against each other. So right now, my mission is to provide adversary support across the Joint Force and the DoD. So my priority is to have a professional adversary squadron. That's it. Everything we do focuses, the funnel goes into professional, world-class adversary support. That's it. From my administrative Marines to my maintainers to my pilots, everything goes to that one priority.
That professionalism. I love that.
Right.
And then I assume you have a priority for your life that's in alignment with that as well. Can I ask what that is right now?
You bet, Renee. So I've got 3 values that I value in my life. The first one is relational grace. The second one is active endurance. And the third is just simply creative productivity. And I'll explain, I'll dig into those just a little bit. So for the relational grace, and I use all of those to filter my decisions through. For our family, my wife, Kelly, and I, she's on board with them. Hers, fit into that. They're worded differently, but they're holistically the same. So for relational grace, that means that in all the relationships in my life, I make room, I create room to accept my friends, my children, my spouse, my extended family members. I recognize that they're going to have different opinions, they're going to have different priorities, and they're probably going to live their life a little bit different than me. But I make space for grace to accept them for where they are and love them as they are. And that just frees me to be a good spouse, a good dad, and a good friend. That's it. I love adventure sports. So I'm an ultra runner, would be the sport that I really pursue. I love going long distances, particularly through the mountains. And so I want everything that I do, the training of my body, the foods that I eat, the rest that I get, I want it to increase my endurance. And so I want my rest to be sound. I want to be able to go long distances, but that also applies to the endurance of my mind, the endurance of my heart. And maybe the word just comes down to, at the end of the day, it's just grit. It's just simply, regardless of the adversity, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental, I have the endurance to push through that. So it's active endurance.
Oh, okay. And the third one?
So creative productivity. I am, for those who are familiar with the Enneagram, I am a very strong type 3. And so it's very easy for me to go into the unhealthy side of that and just be productive for the sake of being productive. And my relationships suffer, my creativity suffers. There's a lot of things that just become unhealthy about that. So the creative side of productivity is just simply, it's just really, for me, it's just saying the word. I'm going to be creative in my productivity. I'm going to give my productivity space. I'm going to set goals. Some of the goals may be lofty, some may be easier, but I'm going to give those goals space, and I'm going to create the space. I'm going to allow the creativity to come in so that it's fun. I can invite my spouse in, who is a very creative, and she's about 180 degrees out from me, but she and I can be productive together, and her artistic side can complement the productivity that we as a family accomplish. So it's just, again, creating space.
Okay, so I've wanted to be like you as a pilot for a long time, and now I want to be like you as a person. Eric, that's so admirable. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing something so personal with us. But now I'm going to ask you more about the flying.
Okay.
What is the most exhilarating moment you've had in an airplane?
Renee, can I say more than one?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It might not be interesting. Of course, you can say more than one.
I would say there's a couple that come to mind. One is being launched off of an aircraft carrier. It's the most incredible thing in the world. So you're going from 0 to 120, 150 miles per hour in 4 seconds, 3 seconds. So it's the most incredibly violent takeoff you could ever imagine. But the neatest thing is it's violent, huge G-forces in your body, but then all of a sudden you go off the end of the ship and everything is just quiet. The airplane is just flying. And after this violent explosion of a launch, all of a sudden within 2 to 3 seconds, you're off the bow and it's quiet. It's so cool. And you're at full power. The airplane's got tons of performance and you're just climbing. You're just climbing to the moon. It's just incredible. The other one is we fly with night vision goggles at night. And with night vision goggles, you can see everything. And so whether you're flying out over the ocean or you're flying out over the desert where there's not a lot of lights, way up high, you can be up at 20 or 30,000 feet. You can see every star in the universe. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You'll see meteor showers, you'll see the Milky Way and everything, because the NVGs just collect all the ambient light and they amplify it. It's unbelievable. It's just, you can see the heavens with the NVGs. And so you're flying at night, you're just in that warm cocoon of the cockpit and you're able to just stare into the universe. It's incredible. So that would be the other one. And then the other one is just the jet that I'm flying right now, the F5. It's this super smooth little race car of a jet. And you can find yourself going supersonic without even knowing it. And it's just so cool to look down the dial and recognize, oh, I broke the speed of sound. That's so cool. So those are the three highlights, I think, that just the joy of flying and what you can do in aviation.
It's amazing. If you were to give advice to someone who's just starting out as an aviator, what would it be?
Show up. Just show up. Just stay after it. We've all heard the stories of the guy or gal who they hung out at the local FBO or the local airport and they just watched. Then maybe they started fueling airplanes. Then maybe they started working through their private pilot's license and they just showed up day after day after day. I've got a friend, the local airport in Tennessee where I grew up, down in Lewisburg, Tennessee. There was a young man down there. He was a little younger than me, but he started out just showing up at the airport and he would ask for rides. So I remember he and I would go flying in this little Cessna. He would just jump in with me. I'd rent the airplane. We'd go fly around. He'd sit in the right seat. He'd fly. And he would just go up to random people there at the airport, just a little Tennessee country airport. Hey, can I go fly with you today? And they would let him go fly. So he did that. Then he started fueling airplanes. He started working on the airplanes. He's working there at the FBO, starts working through his private, his instrument, his commercial. He's now a captain at Delta. And so it's just showing up, Renee. It's just showing up every day.
And then what do you do when you get discouraged?
That's where community comes in, because you're going to have the hard days. And that's where, going back to not making decisions alone, it's having the relationship, surrounding yourself with people who have been there and done that. And so I've had days where I have failed, in the debriefs that we give ourselves in the military fighter community are scathing. You don't do anything right. Everything you do is wrong. And you spend, depending on what's going on, you can spend hours pulling the thread to get down to the root cause of what caused you to not do whatever you're doing well. And you can leave that debrief just thinking, I am horrible. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like, why should I keep doing this? But the great thing is every one of us have been through those debriefs, and there's always somebody who comes and puts their arm around your shoulder and says, yeah, man, I know that happened to me. I've been there. It's going to be okay. That's what the next flight is for. And so it's community, it's relationships.
That's so powerful. And that's so true in life as well. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed the most with my friends who are in the military is that they have battle buddies. You have people who've been there, who've done some of the same things, and who have built a community that they can lean on in good times and bad. They can really share the victories with, and they're all the sweeter for the fact that they've been through some tough times together, and they really bolster each other during the tough times. What would you look for in a community that you're trying to build if you're outside of the military? Because that's an obvious, ground for building community. Outside of the military. Where do you look?
Great question, Renee. I would say vulnerability. It's just vulnerability. Brene Brown has talked about that a lot. And so it's getting a little bit more, people are thinking about that more and more. But what you want to watch out for is, if you're in a flight school and you're working through a license or a certification, and you're partnered with somebody, and that person just he or she does not respond to you when you're struggling. Maybe they make fun of you, or maybe they just don't even respond. They're just like, oh, I'm sorry, you're not doing well, because their competitiveness, they just want to be better than you. That's not what you want. You want to keep an eye out for the individual who just simply says things like, yeah, I know. I don't know. These steep turns are killing me. I don't know if I'm going to get past them, And that's the kind of person you want to look for, who is willing to be vulnerable with you and just share empathy.
So good. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about or you think would be valuable to our audience who are leaders in aviation that I didn't ask you about today?
Renee, I really can't think of anything off the top of my head. I would just say that we, as leaders in aviation, we have to acknowledge that aviation is a fickle business. There's a lot of things that affect our readiness, that affect our bottom line. Everything from fuel prices to supply line parts to the economy. All of those things affect hiring pilots. That's a hard thing to do right now. Your flight department, it's tough. Good mechanics, tough. Aviation is a hard business. And so if I could just say one thing, I would just say, don't go through the aviation business alone. And that, I think, is the beauty of the Aviation Collective, which you have started, Renee. It is a collective. It's a team. We, as aviation professionals, aviation leaders, we cannot do this alone. It takes a community. It takes a collective to do it well. So that'd really be the last thing I would say.
Oh, thank you so much. That warms my heart to have you tell me that that's valuable, because I think that it is also. I've seen that so much in my research and just felt community in other places and wanted to build that in aviation. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question as we close out today, because I've heard this answer before. If I were to get an opportunity to fly on a military jet, what would be the things that I should ask to be demonstrated to me?
Well, I think that's easy, really easy. So depending on the airplane, but you can see a lot of this on YouTube too, so you get the idea. But the first thing you want to ask for is, I want to do a high performance takeoff to an unrestricted climb. And that's where you take off, you suck the landing gear up into the well, and you accelerate to about 500 knots in afterburner before the end of the runway. And then you just pull the nose straight up. And you'll go from ground level from the runway, you'll go all the way up to about 15 to 20,000, however high ATC will let you go. And you'll be there in about 6 seconds. So it's the closest thing to riding a rocket ship we'll ever get to.
That doesn't even commute to me, flying a little Piper Comanche, but what's another thing I should ask for?
The other thing is what we call a squirrel cage. And it's just where you'll be out in the area and you're just putting the aircraft through just different aerobatic paces. So you start with a loop, and then you go into an Immelman, and then you do a half Cubanate, and you just do a couple of these things. And you're just using the energy from each maneuver to sequence into the next one. So it's what you see a lot of performers do at air shows. That's a squirrel cage. So you do that. And then if you've got the ability and you've got the right airspace where you won't shatter any windows, you should definitely ask to go supersonic, because there's not a lot of folks to get that opportunity. And to get to say that you, like Chuck Yeager, broke the sound barrier, it's a pretty cool thing.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I believe that as leaders, we can actually break the sound barriers for ourselves and for the people that we're leading. And
Absolutely.
Eric, I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your wisdom with us today. And I want you to know, and I'll ask all of our listeners to join us on this, that we are praying for you, that we are rooting for you, and that we are eternally grateful for what you're doing to keep our country safe. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Renee. Thanks for having me on. Been great talking with you. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, if you like this podcast today, would you share it with someone else? Follow us, subscribe to the podcast. You can reach out to me at Renee Bangelsdorf on any of the social media platforms. You can also follow the Aviation Collective on social media as well. Thanks so much.